I'm Jack Heath, and this is a story from 400 Minutes of Danger. If you enjoy it, please subscribe, because if I get enough subscribers, I'll be able to do these videos live, and I think that'll be a lot of fun. Okay, this story is called Crusher. It's one I wrote when I was working in a bookstore. Not literally while I was at work there, of course. That would have been irresponsible. I had customers to serve. Okay. Dan, Mrs. Jeffords shouted. You know where the Crusher is? Daniel looked up from his work. He had been down to the Crusher, but it frightened him. The noise, the darkness, the movement of the blades. Sort of, he said. Mrs. Jeffords raised an eyebrow. Sort of, she repeated. Is that a yes? Yes, Daniel admitted. Well, get out the back. We need someone to do a rubbish run. Daniel turned back to the stack of books he had been putting price stickers on. Sure thing, he said, as soon as I finish this. The trolley's full, Mrs. Jeffords said. It needs to go now. The repricing can wait. Daniel nodded. This bookstore received resumes from hopeful teenagers every day. His job was in high demand. He didn't want to look lazy. He put the roll of stickers down and walked through the rows of shelves into the back room, where the ordered cleanliness of the bookshop gave way to total chaos. Boxes of books were stacked haphazardly on top of one another. Customer orders were tucked in a corner with hastily scrawled names on them. Rubber bands were scattered across every flat surface. The rubbish cart was indeed full. There was so much flattened cardboard that Daniel would have to push it slowly or risk it spilling. Thank goodness, Leela said. She was unpacking more boxes on a crowded workbench. I was running out of space. So I see, Daniel said. He pushed the trolley to the back door that led directly outside. I'll be right back. Out on the footpath, he took a deep breath of the fresh air. Within the polished glamour of the shopping centre, there were no windows. It was easy to forget that the outside world existed. But here it was, windy and bright, although clouds hid the sun from view. Daniel pushed the trolley around the corner and through a door marked Staff Only. It was like entering another world. The floor was dirty concrete. Cracked bricks lined the walls. Neon tubes fizzed overhead. This was the side of the shopping centre customers were never supposed to see. Signs displayed pictures of security guards and cameras. This area is monitored, they said. If you see anyone loitering or taking pictures, contact security. Even the phone number was in a big, scary font. Daniel rode a gigantic cargo lift down to the holding dock on the bottom floor. Loading dock, sorry. It was like a big underground car park where enormous boxes were delivered by even more enormous trucks. Coming down here always made Daniel feel tiny, like one of Santa's elves. On weekdays, the loading dock was full of people scurrying back and forth in hard hats and high-vis vests. People nothing like the polite, well-groomed staff who greeted customers upstairs. But today was Sunday, and there was only Daniel, his shuffling footsteps echoing around the cavernous space. Daniel pushed the rubbish cart past a row of huge locked doors painted with logos for electronics shops, supermarkets and toy stores. Soon the Crusher came into view. The Crusher was a steel box about 6 metres long and 2 metres high. There was a gate at one end and a small chute at the other. Usually there was an operator who would open the gate so Daniel could throw the cardboard inside. When the Crusher was full, the operator would lock the gate, start the mechanism and remove the crushed cardboard from the other end when the process was over. It came out looking like brown bales of hay. But today the operator was missing. Daniel looked around. A disposable coffee cup was balanced on a nearby rail. Daniel touched it. Still half full and warm. The operator must have been called away. Daniel couldn't stand around waiting for him to return. The bookshop was expecting him back. He supposed he could load the Crusher himself while he waited. Daniel pulled back the bolt, opened the meshed gate and started throwing cardboard into the Crusher. It landed piece by piece atop the rubbish from all the other stores in the shopping centre. Soon the trolley was empty. There was still no sign of the operator. Daniel closed the gate and locked it. Then he heard movement inside. Daniel peered through the mesh. It was dark inside the Crusher. The scuffling sound had been so quiet that he might have imagined it, and it was gone now. The Crusher was silent. Perhaps it was just the cardboard shifting. Maybe it was a rat. Perhaps it was nothing at all. But he could see a sign next to the gate. Do not climb into the Crusher. Why would there need to be a sign, unless someone was likely to try it? Hello? Daniel called. His voice echoed around the inside of the Crusher. There was no response. Daniel hesitated. He could almost hear his father telling him that he read too many gruesome books and that he should focus on his work. But he couldn't go back to the bookshop. The steel walls of the Crusher were thick and the frame was solid. There was no way anyone could escape once the door was closed. They would be flattened by the enormous metal plates. If someone was inside, Daniel had to warn the operator. Daniel looked around. There was still no one else in the dock. He turned back to the crusher. "Hello?" he called again. No answer. There was probably no one inside. Probably. Daniel was still trying to decide what to do when he heard the rumbling of tires behind him. He turned to see a big truck entering the loading dock. Daniel exhaled. Finally, someone else was here, someone he could ask for help. He peered past the grubby windscreen to get a look at the driver. What he saw instead was a shapeless, convulsing mass slumped over the steering wheel. White-knuckled hands twitched behind the glass. By the time Daniel realized what he was looking at, a driver having some kind of seizure, the truck was already speeding towards him at a deadly pace. The engine screamed even as the brakes shrieked, as if the driver was pushing one foot down on the accelerator and the other on the brake. Daniel bolted as the truck careened towards him. He could smell the diesel cooking in the engine. He dived out of the way just in time and hit the concrete as the truck sped beyond him. The vehicle ploughed through the empty rubbish cart, glanced off the crusher and smashed into the wall behind it with a deafening bang. Bricks shook loose from the ceiling and rained down around it. The truck overbalanced and came crashing down on its side. Daniel scrambled to his feet. He stood staring dazedly at the carnage for a moment before running over to the truck. Through the cracked windscreen he could see the driver, unconscious and surrounded by deflating airbags. He was a young man with a stubbled chin and thick brown hair. "Hey!" Daniel yelled. "Are you okay?" The man didn't react. Blood trickled from his nose. Breathing heavily, Daniel reached for his phone to call emergency services, but he had left it in his pigeonhole upstairs. A siren started wailing. This whole area was monitored by cameras. Someone must have seen what had happened. Hopefully the shopping centre's security team had already called an ambulance. That didn't mean they would get here in time, though. Daniel could smell petrol, and the truck was radiating heat. Neither he nor the driver was safe. Daniel tried to push the windscreen out of the frame so he could drag the driver out of the truck cab, but it was too solid. When he kicked the glass, he had expected it to shatter, but his foot just bounced off. He circled around to the underside of the truck. The heat was worse around here, but it was the only side he could climb. He stood on the inside of the driver's side front wheel and stretched up to grab the one above. The rubber was still warm from the road, but at least it had stopped spinning. Daniel hauled himself up onto the passenger's side of the cabin and reached for the door. Smash! Another brick splintered on the floor. Daniel looked up in time to see a crack grow along the mortar. Dust rained down on his head. The lights fizzled out, blanketing the loading dock in shadow. The truck crash had destabilized the loading dock. The ceiling was caving in. If one of those bricks hit him, he was dead. Wondering how his day had gone so wrong so quickly, Daniel climbed down into the truck's cabin and closed the door above him. It smelled like air freshener and sweat. He put one foot on the gear stick, which wobbled but took his weight. He climbed down, using the passenger seat for handholds, and soon he was crouched on the inside of the driver's door. Daniel wasn't a doctor, but it didn't look like the driver had broken anything, except possibly his nose. Once he recovered from the seizure, he would probably be okay, assuming Daniel could get him out of here before the ceiling collapsed on top of them. The seatbelt was stretched tight across the driver's chest. Daniel fiddled around until he found the buckle and released it. The driver flopped down against the door. A brick hit the passenger window above Daniel's head. The glass cracked but didn't break. He doubted that he would be so lucky twice. Daniel tried to lift the driver, but he was too heavy. There was no way Daniel would be able to climb back up out of the cabin while carrying him. He popped open the glove compartment, looking for something he could use. A map, a GPS device, and a notepad all tumbled onto his head. He ducked out of the way just in time to avoid a falling thermos. The metal lid chipped the driver's window beneath Daniel's feet, which gave him an idea. He picked up the flask and slammed it against the already splintered windscreen. The glass broke into two big chunks and popped out of the frame. Daniel crawled through the gap and heaved the unconscious driver out of the cabin. A huge chunk of the ceiling fell and smashed against the back of the truck. A wheel snapped off the axle and rolled away across the loading dock. The smell of petrol became thicker. The fumes were making Daniel dizzy. The heat was getting stronger. He couldn't actually see any flames, but he was worried the fuel tank might explode. Daniel had thought he would be able to lift the driver onto his shoulders, but it was impossible. Even with the adrenaline flooding his system, the driver was too heavy. The ceiling was coming down all around them in huge blocks. The lifts and the stairwell were all the way over on the other side of the dock. Too far. The back doors to all the shops were locked. There was nowhere to take shelter, except maybe inside the crusher. Daniel stared at the steel walls and the massive door. They looked strong. The impact with the out-of-control truck had hardly left a dent. But would the crusher withstand all the falling concrete? He had to hope so. He was out of other options. Daniel grabbed the driver's wrists and dragged him across the concrete floor to the crusher. He opened the gate and, with the last of his strength, lifted the man and pushed him through the gap. Then he scrambled up after the driver and landed on the soft bed of cardboard inside. Boom! The truck's fuel tank exploded like a grenade. Daniel hauled the gate closed just in time. A cascade of flying bricks bounced off the steel, filling the crusher with dust and gravel. With a mighty crash, the last of the ceiling came down, leaving dents in the steel above Daniel's head. Silence fell. Daniel sneezed some grit out of his lungs and peered out through the mesh of the grate. There was so much dust and smoke in the air that he couldn't see anything. The inside of the crusher was almost pitch black. The only illumination came from a small power light next to the door, which gave everything a dim red glow. "I think we're okay." He let out a shaky breath. The driver didn't respond. Daniel pressed 2 fingers to the man's throat. A pulse. He was alive, but still unconscious. As Daniel's ears adjusted to the silence, he could hear him breathing. This made him wonder about the smoke. Every breath put more deadly toxins into their lungs. How long before someone came to put out the fire? Nothing else seemed to be falling from the ceiling. Maybe they could leave. Daniel tried to push the gate open, but it wouldn't budge. The flying bricks had moved the bolt. With growing panic, Daniel rattled the gate like an angry chimp. It wouldn't move at all. How much time would it take for someone to dig them out? At least 15 minutes, surely. Maybe 20 or 30. Would they last that long? Daniel had to get help, and quickly. He felt his trousers for his phone, and then remembered that he still didn't have it. A groan. "You're awake," Daniel said. He touched the driver's shoulder. "You okay?" The driver didn't respond. "Don't panic," Daniel told him. "I'm sure someone's coming for us. We'll be fine." Another groan, but there was no change in the driver's expression. He looked unconscious. The sound had come from somewhere else. Daniel remembered the scuffling he'd heard before the truck showed up. Maybe someone was in here, buried underneath the rubbish. "Hello?" Daniel called. Silence. Daniel dug through the layers of cardboard. Dust tickled his nose and eyes. Scrunched up balls of paper bounced around him. And then he saw it, sticking out of the garbage. A finger. Daniel pushed some more rubbish aside. The finger was attached to a hand with a missing ring finger. The knuckle ended in a smooth stump. Daniel kept digging. Soon he had uncovered a body. The red glow from the power light was just bright enough for him to tell that the woman was tall, with slip-on shoes and a heavy overcoat. Her hair was grey, or perhaps blonde. She lay face down on the cardboard. Daniel took her hand. "Are you all right?" he asked. She groaned again. Something stuck out of the back of her neck, a small metal cylinder with feathers sticking out the end. It looked to Daniel like a dart. Someone had shot this woman, drugged her. Who was she? How had she ended up here? Daniel couldn't roll her over with the poison dart in her neck. Very, very carefully, he plucked it out. It was surprisingly light, no heavier than a thick pencil. He stabbed it into a flattened box so there was no risk of pricking himself with it, and then rolled the woman over. "What happened?" she whispered. Her voice was rough, as though she hadn't spoken in a long time. "The ceiling fell down," Daniel said. "What ceiling? Where am I? Who are you?" Daniel ran his fingers through his hair, unsure where to begin. Her last question was the easiest to answer. "I'm Daniel," he began. "We're, stuck in a rubbish compactor under a shopping centre." The woman sat up and sniffed. "Is something burning?" "A truck. The driver had a fit and crashed it." Daniel gestured at the driver. "Lucky he did, otherwise I wouldn't have found you." "So we're trapped in a compactor filled with flammable materials with a burning truck right outside the door, correct?" Daniel nodded. The woman didn't look frightened. Whoever she was no stranger to dangerous situations. "We need to get that gate open," she said. "Is it stuck?" "Locked, I think." Daniel scrambled back over to the gate. "There's a bolt." "And you can't reach it?" Daniel jammed his fingers through the bars. He could feel various metallic shapes, but none that moved. "I can't quite—" Something beeped. He and the woman looked at each other. "What was that?" she asked. No, Daniel thought. There was a humming from beneath their feet. "I think I just switched it on," he whispered. The rubbish started to slide around him. The conveyor belt under the cardboard was dragging it away from the door. Hydraulic pistons whined. Paper rustled. "Grab onto something," the woman yelled. Daniel gripped the gate and held on tight. The woman did the same. The crusher was divided into two halves. One half was where the rubbish was loaded in. The other half was where the rubbish was flattened, turned into bales, and removed. As long as they stayed in the loading half, they would be fine. This would be easy if it was just the two of them, but the unconscious driver was being dragged away with the rubbish. A massive steel plate was waiting to squash him. Daniel let go of the door and waded into the moving river of rubbish. Just as the driver's ankles entered the danger, Daniel grabbed his wrists and pulled. The man slid easily over the cardboard. But walking back towards the door was like walking uphill during a landslide. The rubbish kept slipping away under Daniel's feet. "Help me!" he yelled. The woman let go of the door with one hand and reached out for Daniel with the other. He stumbled towards her and just managed to grab on. She squeezed so hard the bones in his fingers hurt, but she pulled him close enough to the door that he could grab it. She was incredibly strong. "Thanks," he puffed. "How long until emergency services get here?" I don't know. An alarm went off." They each held onto the door with one hand and the driver's wrists with the other, sharing his weight as his legs dragged along the rubbish. But Daniel's arms were already tiring, and it was getting harder to hold on. The last of the cardboard had been sucked into the compactor, exposing the conveyor belt beneath them. Nasty metal spikes lined the rubber, designed to make sure all the rubbish was sucked in. The spikes kept catching on the driver's boots and trousers. Soon they would pull him into the compactor. "He's too heavy," the woman yelled. "We need to shut down that conveyor belt." Daniel pictured the control panel for the crusher. There was an emergency stop button, but it was slightly further away from the gate than the other controls. They wouldn't be able to reach it. "The button is too far away," he cried. "Then we need to cut the power somehow." Daniel looked around frantically. "I don't see any wires. Do you have a phone?" "No, they must have taken it." The woman didn't say who "they" were. "What about him?" Daniel felt a surge of hope. He hadn't thought to check the driver's pockets, but the man's legs were dragging along the conveyor belt. Daniel couldn't reach his pockets while he was up here clinging to the door. "I'll check," he said. "You hold him." The woman gritted her teeth, taking the driver's weight by herself. "I can give you 30 seconds, she grunted. Daniel dropped down onto the conveyor belt. Crawling along it in order to stay in the same place, he rummaged through the driver's pockets. He found nothing but lint in one of them. "Hurry!" the woman gasped. Daniel checked the opposite pocket. "Yes!" "I have his phone," he yelled. "I can't hold him much longer," the woman said. Daniel grabbed the driver's floppy wrist, sharing the weight. Instead of holding onto the jaw, he jogged along the conveyor belt so he had one hand free to use the phone. If it was locked with a pin, he would be able to call emergency services, but no one else. Fortunately, there was no pin. Daniel dialed... "Oh, who are you calling?" the woman asked. Daniel dialed the number he had seen on the anti-terrorism poster. "Shopping centre security," he said. The phone rang and rang. He guessed they were getting a lot of calls. Running along the belt while half carrying the driver in almost total blackness was exhausting. He couldn't keep this up much longer. "Security," a voice said finally. "3 people are trapped in the crusher in the loading dock," Daniel yelled. "You have to shut it down, quickly." "Slow down," the man said. "I can cut the power from here. Do you know which crusher they're in?" Daniel hadn't known there was more than one. "I don't know. Shut them all down. Hurry!" "Hold on." "Hold on?" But the man was already gone. Daniel tripped over a spike on the conveyor belt. He cried out as he fell and slammed down onto the rubber alongside the driver. They both trundled backwards into the more dangerous half of the crusher. The massive steel plate loomed over Daniel's head. He tried to climb to his feet, but the sliding rubbish and the erratic movement of the conveyor belt made it impossible. Soon he was pressed against the back wall of the crusher, getting buried in garbage. "I've got you!" The woman dropped down onto the belt and ran over to him. She grabbed him with one hand and the driver with the other. And then the conveyor belt stopped moving. The red light turned green. It was so sudden that the woman fell over, landing alongside Daniel on the stack of cardboard. For a wonderful moment, he thought someone had successfully shut down the crusher. Then the steel plate started to descend on top of him. "No!" Daniel screamed. He tried to dig his way out, but the rubbish was already compressing around him. It was like trying to crawl through setting concrete. He couldn't see the woman anymore, but he could hear her screaming. The hydraulics whined as the plate began to crush the rubbish and the 3 people buried amongst it. Daniel managed to push a hand out of the debris and grab one of the spikes on the conveyor belt, but he couldn't haul himself out of the danger zone. The plate was too low and the rubbish was too tight around him. It was like being squeezed in a giant pair of pliers. That's all that will be left of me, he realized. One hand holding onto a spike. The rest will be gone. His ribs creaked. The plate was forcing the air out of his lungs. He was getting dizzy. This was the end. And then the plate stopped descending. The green light went out. Daniel could hear voices. Not the woman. Someone else. Someone in the loading dock. He tried to call out to them, but his voice emerged as a pitiful croak. "In here," the woman called. Daniel couldn't turn his head to see her, but she sounded like she was near the gate. She must have gotten out from under the plate. "We're in here!" Daniel heard rubble shifting outside. Torchlight shone into the crusher. "Agent Relio," a male voice called. "Is that you?" Daniel tried to speak, but he had no more air left. His mouth moved silently, like that of a fish. "About time," the woman said. "Quick, there's a kid trapped under there." "Let the fluid out of the hydraulics to release the pressure," the man told someone. There was a clank and a hiss. The weight on Daniel's back eased slightly. He took a gasp of air. His whole body ached. Slowly, he turned his head. 2 uniformed men stood by the crusher gate. One of them was cutting through the bolt with some kind of electric saw. The badges on their sleeves read SPII. "Who's the kid?" the other man asked. "He saved my life," the woman said. The man nodded slowly. "Hold tight," he told Daniel. "We'll get you out." Hold tight. Daniel tried to laugh, but he still couldn't move. The bolt snapped. One of the men crawled into the crusher and started pulling compacted cardboard out from around Daniel. He felt the pressure around his ribs ease off. "How much do you know?" he asked. Daniel was confused. "About what?" The man grinned, showing chipped teeth. "Excellent." He dragged Daniel out of the garbage. "We owe you a great debt, but in future, don't climb into these things." He jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "Didn't you see the sign?" This time, Daniel did laugh. That's the end of the story. Hope you like it. Please subscribe. The book is 400 Minutes of Danger, and I'll be back to do another video tomorrow, I reckon. Going to keep doing them as long as people are still watching them. See you next time.